Well, good afternoon. Happy Friday, May 8th. Mark Milam here, your mortgage professional. As we head into the weekend, we find ourselves still embroiled here in the conflict in the Middle East, the war in Iran, which has obviously taken its toll on the price of oil. That has dragged up interest rates across the board, including mortgage rates over the past 60 plus days. We hit the best levels post pandemic for mortgage rates on February the 27th. Ever since then, with the war breaking out the next day, ever since then, we've been rising or at a level, it's about a half a point to three-quarters of a point higher than that best post-pandemic level. We could sure use a return to that level to help the housing market and affordability. What's so fascinating about what's been happening over the past 3 to 4 weeks is that we've simultaneously set records in the stock market while also having some of the lowest consumer sentiment readings ever recorded in the history of the country. To be specific, the United States has a measure or a metric for consumer sentiment called the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index. It's published every single month. It's one of the longest running macro data sets that we have in this country, and it's been around for 80 plus years. Last month, in the month of April, we set an all-time low for consumer sentiment. To be clear, consumer sentiment reading of 100 is a neutral reading. Anything higher than 100 is optimistic. Anything below 100 is pessimistic. So we were very anxious to see what would happen today, May 8th, when we got the next month's reading on consumer sentiment. Would April be an outlier, just a random oddball survey response, and we would see a bounce back? Or would we continue the trend and stay at these really low pessimistic levels based upon consumer feedback to this survey? I'll flip the screen around and I won't bury the lead here. May Consumer Sentiment Index today comes in at 48.2, the worst reading ever in the history of the index. Now, to be clear, when we talk about going back 80 years, we're inclusive of the Korean War, the Vietnam War, we're inclusive of the Gulf Wars, obviously the run up in interest rates in the 1980s due to the energy crisis that happened there. We're inclusive of the Gulf Wars, both of them, 9/11, the Great Recession, and the pandemic. You can take all of those and make them number 2 through number 20 the number one worst consumer sentiment index in history just happened today. So, what does that tell us? What does that tell us about how the consumer is feeling in a country that's not in a recession by any measurable metric? We are not in a recession, and we're setting all time records in the stock market. It's a fascinating topic and one that is worth examining. And I'm going to flip the screen around here and show it to you a little bit more. If we scroll into this article on CNBC from today, we can see that per the survey, inflation fears were the primary driver of the continued trend lower in consumer attitudes. One third of the respondents mentioned gas prices as the biggest cause of concern. We all know what's happened to gas prices in the wake of the conflict in Iran. Another third also cited tariffs, both connected to the president who launched his attack on Iran in late February and announced an aggressive slate of tariffs in 2025. Taken together, consumers continue to feel buffeted by cost pressures led by soaring prices at the pump. And that's really all you need to know. Now, whether or not it makes perfect sense and aligns with what's happening in the stock market is not the economy, right? The stock market is a component of the economy, but it's certainly not the economy. And when you consider that the vast majority, up to 87 to 90% by some measures, the vast majority of the stock market is owned by about 10% of the population, you can understand why the other 90% feels the way that they feel. Let me flip the screen around and show you one more chart. And this one I think is pretty fascinating. If you look back at the history of the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index, you find this period right here that I'm going to call sort of a golden age period. It happened from 1998 to 2001 when consumer sentiment was consistently over 100. And what's really interesting about this period is it's also the same 4 year window where the United States ran a federal budget surplus. We did not have a deficit. We were not spending more than we were collecting in terms of tax revenue. We actually had more tax revenue coming in than what we were spending. We were carrying a budget surplus. In fact, 2001 was the last year in history of the United States that we had a budget surplus. But as we continue to spend more than we bring in, and right now we spend about 25% more than what we collect in tax revenue, as we continue to let inflation hover at levels above 2%, it takes its toll on the consumer. And when it takes its toll on the consumer, we see it show up in consumer activities like home purchases or appliance purchases or auto loans or any sort of borrowing that would give you some sort of sense of confidence. Ultimately, this has got to get solved from an inflation standpoint and from a fiscal discipline standpoint for our country. Until we do that, I think we can expect more readings like the ones we're getting right now, particularly with the war in Iran and what it's doing to the cost of energy. If I can be of any service to you over the weekend, don't hesitate to reach out, mark.milam at highlandmtg.com. Have a good weekend.